Hi guys, welcome back to another deep dive into history.
Tonight, we're stepping back in time to explore something truly fascinating, yet peacefully routine. The daily rhythms of life in a traditional samurai village during Japan's Edo period. Picture this: a small mountain settlement where honor, tradition, and the gentle flow of seasonal life create a world that feels both foreign and surprisingly familiar. We'll walk through cobblestone paths, witness morning training sessions in misty courtyards, observe the careful preparation of meals that have been passed down through generations, and discover how every single moment of the day was infused with purpose, respect, and an almost meditative attention to detail. From the first light of dawn when the village awakens to the sounds of bamboo fountains and distant temple bells, to the evening hours when paper lanterns cast warm glows through wooden lattice windows, we'll experience what it truly meant to live according to the way of the warrior, not just in times of conflict, but in the beautiful, mundane moments that made up the fabric of everyday existence.
Okay, friends, before you settle in, if you enjoy this kind of deep dive content, then click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. And yes, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I really enjoy seeing where everyone is listening from.
Now, dim the lights and turn on the fan, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. The village of Takamura, nestled quietly in a valley between two gentle mountains, its existence marked not by grand castles or bustling marketplaces, but by the subtle harmony of a community that had learned to find profound meaning in the simplest of daily rituals. The settlement had grown organically over 3 centuries, each generation adding their careful contributions to create a living masterpiece of traditional Japanese architecture and landscape design. Stone pathways wound between houses like streams of carefully placed river rocks, each stone selected not just for its practical function, but for its contribution to the overall aesthetic harmony of the village layout. Ancient pine trees, some over 200 years old, stood as silent sentinels throughout the community, their gnarled branches providing shade in summer and bearing snow with graceful dignity during the winter months. The mountains that embraced Takamura were themselves characters in the daily drama of village life, their moods changing with weather and season in ways that the villagers had learned to read like familiar faces. Mount Kiyoshi to the east caught the first light of dawn each morning, its peak often crowned with clouds that would predict the day's weather patterns. Mount Seiryu to the west provided dramatic sunset displays that marked the end of each day's labor, its slopes covered with forests that supplied the village with wild foods, medicinal plants, and the materials needed for countless aspects of daily life. Between these two protective giants, the valley floor spread like a green tapestry woven from rice paddies, vegetable gardens, orchards, and the carefully maintained spaces where the village buildings sat in perfect harmony with their natural surroundings. The rice paddies that formed the economic foundation of the community were themselves works of art, their terraced levels following the natural contours of the land while creating geometric patterns that changed with each season. During the growing season, they reflected the sky like a series of mirrors, broken occasionally by the movement of herons and other water birds that had learned to coexist with the farmers' activities. In winter, when the paddies lay dormant under thin sheets of ice, They became meditation gardens where villagers could walk and contemplate the cycles of rest and renewal that governed all life. The intricate irrigation system that fed these paddies was a marvel of engineering that had been refined over generations, with wooden gates and stone channels that directed the mountain water exactly where it was needed, while creating the musical sounds of flowing water that provided a constant, soothing background to village life. As the first pale light of dawn crept over the eastern ridge, painting the mist-covered rice paddies in shades of silver and gold, the village began its awakening, with the same careful deliberation that governed every aspect of life here. The transition from night to day was not abrupt, but gradual, with the darkness slowly giving way to the deep purple of pre-dawn, then the soft grays and pinks of early morning, and finally the golden light that would illuminate the day's activities. This daily transformation was observed and appreciated by the villagers as one of the natural spectacles that enriched their lives and reminded them of their connection to the larger rhythms of earth and sky. The mist that rose from the paddies and streams created an ethereal quality to the morning air, softening the edges of buildings and trees until the entire village seemed to exist in a dreamlike state between earth and heaven. The sound that broke the morning silence was not harsh or jarring, but rather the gentle tock, tock, tock of a bamboo water fountain, its rhythm as steady and reassuring as a heartbeat, marking time in a way that seemed to slow the very passage of hours. This particular fountain, called a shishi odoshi, had been installed by Kenji's grandfather as a practical device to frighten deer away from the vegetable gardens. But over the decades, it had become something much more significant: a timekeeper, a meditation aid, and a symbol of the way human ingenuity could work in harmony with natural forces. The bamboo tube would slowly fill with water from a carefully positioned spout, and when it reached capacity, it would tip forward to empty itself, then fall back against a stone with a hollow, resonant sound that carried clearly through the morning air. The interval between sounds was perfectly regular, creating a natural metronome that seemed to synchronize the entire village's activities with the peaceful rhythms of flowing water. Kenji Matsumoto, a samurai of modest rank but deep devotion to his craft, opened his eyes in his small but immaculately maintained dwelling as he had done every morning for the past 15 years. The moment of awakening was not jarring but gentle, as if his body had learned to synchronize itself with the natural rhythms that governed village life. He had trained himself to wake just before the first light appeared over the eastern mountains, allowing him to witness the daily miracle of sunrise while his mind was still clear and receptive to the beauty of the moment. His sleeping area was positioned precisely to take advantage of this daily light show, with the morning sun streaming through carefully placed openings in the paper walls to create patterns of light and shadow that changed subtly as the sun climbed higher in the sky. His home, like all the others in the village, was constructed in the traditional style, with sliding paper doors, tatami mat floors, and wooden beams that had been carefully selected and placed according to principles passed down through generations. The timber used in its construction had come from trees grown in the village's own forests, each piece aged and seasoned according to techniques that ensured it would last for centuries, while developing the rich patina and character that marked truly fine craftsmanship.
The joinery was accomplished without nails or metal fasteners, using instead the complex system of interlocking wooden joints that allowed the building to flex and move with earthquakes and seasonal changes while maintaining its structural integrity. The proportions of the rooms followed mathematical principles derived from ancient Chinese philosophy, creating spaces that felt harmonious and peaceful to their inhabitants, while also being perfectly functional for daily life. The interior was sparse by modern standards, but every item present served both a practical and spiritual purpose.
His katana rested on a wooden stand in the alcove, its presence both comforting and commanding, while a small scroll bearing calligraphy from his grandfather hung nearby, reminding all who entered of the importance of cultivating both strength and wisdom. The katana itself was not merely a weapon, but a work of art and spiritual significance, its blade forged by a master swordsmith according to techniques that had been perfected over centuries of development.
The steel had been folded and refolded countless times to create the distinctive grain pattern that marked superior workmanship, and the edge had been polished to a mirror-like finish that could reflect light with crystal clarity.
The mounting was equally refined, with silk wrapping on the handle and decorative metalwork that displayed the owner's family mon or crest in subtle but unmistakable detail. The calligraphy scroll contained a poem written by his grandfather about the nature of true strength, expressing the philosophy that physical power without moral character was worthless, while moral character without the ability to act was equally inadequate. The characters had been brushed with masterful skill, each stroke placed with precision and flowing with the kind of energy that could only come from decades of practice and deep understanding of both the technical and spiritual aspects of the art. The paper itself was handmade from local plants and had been prepared with a sizing that would allow it to preserve the ink for generations, ensuring that this wisdom would remain available to future members of the family. Other furnishings in the main room included a low writing desk made from a single piece of aged cypress, its surface worn smooth by years of use, but still maintaining the natural beauty of the wood grain. Brushes, inkstones, and paper were arranged on the desk with the same careful attention to both function and aesthetics that characterized all aspects of village life. A small ceramic brazier provided heat during cold weather, its design simple but elegant, with openings positioned to create optimal airflow for efficient burning, while also allowing the warm light of the coals to create a cozy atmosphere during evening activities. The morning air carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the trees that lined the main path through the village, mixed with the earthy smell of damp soil from the gardens where vegetables grew in carefully tended rows. These cherry trees had been planted by the village founders more than 2 centuries earlier, selected not just for their spring beauty, but for their symbolic significance as reminders of the transient nature of life and the importance of appreciating each moment of existence. The blossoms appeared for only a brief period each spring, but their impact on village life was profound, inspiring poetry, art, and philosophical reflection, while also marking the beginning of the agricultural season. The petals that fell from the trees were not swept away as litter, but were allowed to carpet the pathways with natural beauty, gradually decomposing to enrich the soil while providing a tangible reminder of the cycles of growth and decay that governed all existence. The vegetable gardens that contributed their earthy fragrance to the morning air were marvels of intensive cultivation, with every square foot of soil utilized according to principles of crop rotation and companion planting that maximized both productivity and soil health. Root vegetables grew alongside leafy greens in carefully planned combinations that would provide fresh food throughout the growing season, while also improving the fertility of the earth for future plantings. Herbs for cooking and medicine were interspersed among the food crops, their aromatic foliage adding both practical value and sensory pleasure to the garden environment. Composting areas were positioned downhill from the growing beds, where kitchen scraps and garden waste were transformed into rich humus that would feed next year's plants, creating a closed loop of nutrients that demonstrated the villagers' understanding of ecological principles. Kenji rose from his futon with the fluid grace that came from decades of disciplined movement, his body automatically assuming the posture that had been ingrained in him since childhood. Every gesture, from the way he folded his sleeping mat to the precise manner in which he arranged his clothing, reflected the principle that there was no separation between the physical and spiritual aspects of existence. His morning routine began with a period of quiet meditation, sitting in seiza position, facing the small shrine that occupied one corner of his main room. This daily practice was not merely a religious obligation, but a practical necessity, a way of centering his mind and preparing his spirit for whatever challenges the day might bring. The meditation position itself was considered important, with the legs folded beneath the body in a way that created stability and alertness, while also maintaining proper circulation and breathing. The posture had been refined over centuries of practice by monks and warriors who understood that the position of the body directly influenced the quality of mental concentration and spiritual awareness. The shrine was simple, containing only a small Buddha statue, some incense, and offerings of rice and water that were replaced daily. The Buddha figure was carved from local wood by an artist who had lived in the village generations earlier, its features expressing the serene compassion that was considered the highest spiritual achievement. The wood had darkened with age and the touch of countless hands, developing a patina that seemed to glow with inner light when illuminated by candles or morning sunshine. The incense was made from plants gathered in the surrounding mountains, mixed according to recipes that had been preserved by the village's spiritual traditions, its smoke rising in delicate spirals that seemed to carry prayers and intentions toward the realm of the sacred. The daily offerings of rice and water represented the villagers' understanding that spiritual practice was not separate from material existence, but intimately connected to the basic necessities of life. The rice was always taken from the same supply that fed the family, symbolizing the sharing of earthly sustenance with spiritual forces, while the water came from the same mountain streams that supplied all the village's needs, representing the flow of life energy that connected all beings. These offerings were renewed each morning with the same careful attention that was given to any important task, the old offerings being respectfully disposed of in ways that returned them to the natural cycle of growth and decay. As he sat in stillness, breathing deeply and allowing his mind to settle, the sounds of the village awakening gradually filtered through the paper walls. The meditation practice involved paying attention to these sounds without being disturbed by them, learning to maintain inner peace even while remaining fully aware of the world's activities. This skill was considered essential for a samurai who needed to be able to act with clarity and precision even in the midst of chaos and confusion. The morning meditation was like tuning a musical instrument, adjusting the mind's sensitivity and responsiveness to achieve the perfect balance between alertness and calm that would be needed throughout the day. Children's voices could be heard in the distance, not loud or boisterous, but carrying that particular quality of excitement that comes with the start of a new day. These were the voices of young people who had been raised according to principles that emphasized both individual development and community responsibility. Children who understood that their behavior reflected not just on themselves, but on their families and the entire village. Their morning activities were structured but not oppressive, with time for both learning and play, both individual pursuits and group activities that would help them develop into well-rounded adults capable of contributing meaningfully to community life. The gentle scraping of bamboo rakes against stone paths told him that the groundskeepers were already beginning their work, maintaining the meticulous cleanliness and order that characterized every corner of the village. This daily maintenance was not viewed as mere drudgery, but as a form of spiritual practice, a way of showing respect for the community and maintaining the harmony between human habitation and natural beauty. The groundskeepers took pride in their work, approaching each task with the same attention to detail and aesthetic sensitivity that characterized all village crafts. The patterns created by their rakes in the gravel paths were temporary artworks that would be erased and recreated daily, embodying the Buddhist teaching about the impermanence of all phenomena, while also contributing to the visual beauty that enhanced daily life. The paths themselves were works of engineering and art, designed to handle the practical needs of foot traffic while also creating beautiful compositions that changed with the viewing angle and the quality of light. Different materials were used for different purposes. Smooth stones for areas where people walked quickly, textured surfaces where more careful footing was required, and decorative elements that served as focal points for contemplation. The drainage was carefully planned to prevent erosion and puddling while also creating opportunities for the water itself to become part of the aesthetic experience, with small channels and collection basins that turned the management of rainwater into artistic features. After his meditation, Kenji moved to the small area behind his home where he kept a basin for washing. This outdoor washing area was designed according to principles that transformed a practical necessity into an opportunity for communion with nature and contemplation of the day ahead. The basin itself was carved from a single piece of granite that had been selected for its pleasing shape and smooth texture, positioned to catch the morning light while also providing privacy for the washing ritual. A bamboo pipe brought fresh water from the mountain stream, its flow controlled by a simple but ingenious valve system that allowed the user to regulate the water temperature,
by mixing the cold stream water with sun-warmed water from a storage tank.
The water was cold, drawn from the mountain stream that ran through the center of the village, but this was considered beneficial, a way of awakening both body and spirit to face the challenges of the day.
The stream itself was one of the village's most precious resources. Its clear, mineral-rich water providing not only drinking water and irrigation, but also the power for the village's small mills and the habitat for fish that supplemented the community's food supply.
The water's journey from its mountain source to its eventual destination in the valley's river system was carefully monitored and protected, with the villagers understanding that their prosperity and health depended on maintaining the purity and flow of this vital resource.
The temperature of the mountain water remained relatively constant throughout the year. Never quite freezing even in winter, but always refreshingly cool in summer. This natural consistency was valued not just for its practical benefits, but also for its symbolic significance as a reminder of the unchanging principles that should guide human behavior despite the constant changes in external circumstances. The act of washing with cold water was seen as a form of discipline, a daily practice that strengthened both physical resilience and mental fortitude, while also creating a moment of heightened awareness and presence. He washed his face and hands with careful attention, not merely for cleanliness, but as a ritual of purification that prepared him for the responsibilities ahead. The washing process followed a specific sequence that had been developed over generations of practice, beginning with the hands and wrists, then the face and neck, and finally a complete rinse that symbolically washed away the remnants of sleep and dreams while preparing the body to engage fully with the waking world. The soap used was made from plant oils and ash, according to traditional recipes that cleaned effectively while being gentle on the skin and harmless to the environment when the wash water returned to the stream system. The act of washing became a moment of mindfulness, each movement deliberate and focused, transforming a mundane necessity into something approaching sacred practice. This transformation of ordinary activities into opportunities for spiritual development was one of the fundamental principles of village life, reflecting the understanding that enlightenment was not something to be achieved through exotic practices or dramatic gestures, but through the patient cultivation of awareness and intention in every aspect of daily existence. The simple act of washing one's face could become a meditation on purity, gratitude, and preparation for service to others, while the feeling of cold water against the skin served as a reminder of the vitality and immediacy of physical existence. As he dried his face with a soft cotton towel that had been woven by village craftspeople, Kenji took a moment to observe the morning light as it played across the surface of the washing basin and the surrounding garden. This moment of aesthetic appreciation was not an indulgence, but an essential part of the morning routine, a way of training the eye and mind to notice and value the beauty that existed in every moment and every place for those who had learned to see it. The quality of light at different times of day was something that all villagers learned to appreciate, understanding how it affected both practical activities and emotional well-being, while also providing a constant source of inspiration and wonder. The towel itself represented the interconnected nature of village life, having been created through the combined efforts of farmers who grew the cotton,
workers who processed the fibers, weavers who created the cloth, and seamstresses who finished the final product. Each step in this process had been accomplished according to standards that prioritized both quality and beauty, with the understanding that everyday objects should enhance rather than merely serve their users. The texture, absorbency, and durability of the towel were all carefully considered, but so too were its color, pattern, and the way it felt in the hand, reflecting the village's commitment to bringing artistry into every aspect of daily life. As he dressed in his simple but well-maintained kimono, Kenji could hear the sounds of his neighbors beginning their own morning routines. The kimono itself was a masterpiece of understated elegance, woven from silk that had been produced in the village's own silk farm, where mulberry trees were cultivated specifically to feed the silkworms whose cocoons provided the raw material for the finest textiles. The silk had been dyed using natural pigments derived from local plants and minerals, creating subtle colors that would fade gracefully with age, while maintaining their basic beauty and dignity. The garment's construction involved hundreds of tiny, precise stitches, each one placed by hand, according to techniques that ensured both durability and comfort, while allowing the fabric to drape naturally and move fluidly with the wearer's body. The patterns woven into the silk were not merely decorative, but carried symbolic meanings that reflected the wearer's values and aspirations. Kenji's kimono featured a subtle design of bamboo leaves that represented flexibility and resilience, qualities that were especially valued in samurai philosophy. The bamboo plant itself was revered for its ability to bend without breaking, to grow rapidly when conditions were favorable, and to provide useful materials for countless practical applications, while also creating beautiful natural environments that brought peace and inspiration to those who spent time among the groves. The village was small enough that everyone knew each other, and the rhythms of daily life had become so synchronized over the years that it was possible to tell time simply by listening to the patterns of activity. This synchronization was not the result of rigid scheduling or authoritarian control, but rather emerged naturally from the shared understanding of what needed to be accomplished and the most efficient and harmonious ways of accomplishing it. The villagers had learned to coordinate their activities through subtle cues and mutual consideration, creating a community rhythm that maximized both individual freedom and collective effectiveness. Mrs. Tanaka, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, would always be the first to start her morning cooking, and the smell of miso soup and grilled fish would soon begin drifting through the air. Her cooking was renowned throughout the village, not just for its flavor, but for the way it seemed to embody the essence of nurturing care and traditional wisdom. She had learned her techniques from her mother and grandmother, women who had themselves been famous for their culinary skills, and she continued to refine and perfect her methods even after decades of daily practice. The miso she used was made according to a family recipe that involved fermenting soybeans for exactly 18 months in wooden barrels that had been seasoned by generations of use, developing complex flavors that could not be achieved through any shortcut or artificial process. The fish that provided protein for the morning meal came from the village's carefully managed ponds and streams, caught using traditional methods that ensured the sustainability of these important food sources, while also maintaining the natural balance of aquatic ecosystems. The fishing techniques had been developed over centuries of experience with local conditions, involving the use of specialized nets, traps, and hooks that were effective but not destructive, allowing the fish populations to regenerate naturally while providing a steady supply of fresh food for the community. The blacksmith, Yamada-san, would begin lighting his forge shortly after sunrise, and the distinctive sound of his hammer striking metal would provide a steady percussion to the day's soundtrack. His forge was located at the edge of the village, where the smoke and noise would not disturb residential areas, but where the dramatic sight of sparks and flames could still be appreciated by those who enjoyed watching masterful craftsmanship in action. The forge itself was a marvel of traditional engineering, designed to achieve the precise temperatures needed for working different types of metal, while also being efficient in its use of fuel and comfortable for the smith who would spend long hours working at the anvil. Yamada-san's work included not only the practical items needed for agriculture and household use, tools, hardware, and implements, but also the artistic metalwork that decorated temples, homes, and ceremonial objects throughout the village. His techniques had been passed down through generations of smiths in his family, and he continued to experiment and innovate within the traditional framework, always seeking to improve the quality and beauty of his work while respecting the fundamental principles that had guided his craft for centuries. The rhythmic sound of his hammer was music to the ears of villagers who appreciated skilled craftsmanship, and children often gathered at a safe distance to watch the magical transformation of raw metal into useful and beautiful objects. The morning training session was perhaps the most important part of Kenji's day, and indeed of most of the samurai who lived in Takamura. This daily practice served multiple purposes: maintaining physical fitness and martial skills, cultivating mental discipline and spiritual awareness, and strengthening the bonds between the warriors who would depend on each other in times of crisis. The training was not viewed as preparation for some future conflict, but as valuable in itself, a way of developing the complete person through the integration of physical, mental, and spiritual practices that had been refined over centuries of warrior tradition. The practice ground was located in the center of the village, a flat area covered with well-maintained gravel that had been raked into perfect patterns. The location was chosen not only for its practical advantages, level ground, good drainage, and central accessibility, but also for its symbolic significance as the heart of the community's commitment to the warrior path. The gravel itself was brought from a specific riverbed known for producing stones of uniform size and pleasing color, and it was replaced regularly to maintain optimal conditions for training while also preserving the aesthetic beauty that was considered essential to any space where important activities took place. The patterns raked into the gravel were changed daily, creating a constantly evolving artwork that provided visual interest while also serving practical purposes. The lines and curves helped practitioners orient themselves during training exercises, while also creating visual guides for the precise footwork that was essential to effective martial arts practice. The rake marks also showed clearly where feet had been placed during training, allowing instructors to analyze and correct students' movements with great precision, while providing visual feedback that helped accelerate the learning process. Wooden posts of varying heights were positioned throughout the space, along with targets made of straw and cloth that had been replaced countless times over the years. These training aids were crafted by village artisans who understood that their quality would directly affect the effectiveness of the practice sessions and the safety of the participants. The posts were made from specially selected hardwoods that could withstand repeated striking without splintering or becoming damaged, while the targets were constructed using materials that would provide realistic resistance without causing injury to weapons or practitioners. The positioning of these training aids followed principles derived from centuries of experience with different types of combat scenarios and techniques. The training ground was surrounded by cherry trees and bamboo groves, creating a natural amphitheater that seemed to hold and amplify the sounds of practice, while also providing a sense of peace and isolation from the outside world. This natural enclosure was not accidental, but had been carefully planned and cultivated over generations, with trees selected and positioned to create optimal conditions for both practical training and aesthetic experience. The cherry trees provided spectacular displays during their brief blooming season, reminding practitioners of the impermanence that made each moment of life precious, while the bamboo created year-round screening and sound buffering that allowed for focused practice without distraction. The bamboo groves also provided practical benefits beyond their aesthetic and acoustic qualities. The young shoots were harvested for food during their season, while the mature canes were used for countless applications throughout the village, from construction materials and tools to artistic projects and household items. The groves required careful management to maintain their health and productivity, with selective harvesting and periodic thinning that ensured continued growth while preventing overcrowding that could weaken the entire grove. During different seasons, the training ground took on dramatically different character and challenges. Spring brought the distraction of beautiful blossoms and the fresh energy of new growth, requiring practitioners to maintain focus amid natural beauty and awakening life. Summer heat demanded adjustments in training schedules and techniques, with early morning and evening sessions becoming more important than midday practice. Autumn provided ideal conditions with comfortable temperatures and stable weather, while winter training in snow and cold developed special qualities of endurance and mental toughness that were highly valued in warrior tradition. Kenji arrived at the training ground just as the morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing the familiar sight of other samurai already engaged in their morning kata. These were not the flashy, dramatic sword movements that might be seen in theatrical performances, but rather the slow, precise, almost meditative forms that had been refined over centuries of practice. Each movement flowed into the next with liquid smoothness, and watching a master perform kata was like observing a dance that told stories of ancient wisdom and accumulated skill. The sensei, an elderly man named Ogawa, who had served the domain for over 40 years, moved among his students with the quiet authority of someone who had earned his position through decades of dedicated practice rather than mere appointment. His corrections were minimal and subtle, a slight adjustment to the angle of a wrist, a gentle reminder about the positioning of feet, a word about breathing that could transform the entire quality of a movement. He rarely spoke loudly, and never with harshness, understanding that true learning came not from criticism, but from patient guidance and endless repetition. The morning practice session lasted for nearly 2 hours, but time seemed to move differently during these periods of concentrated activity. The repetitive nature of the exercises, combined with the focused attention required to perform them correctly, created a state of mind that was both alert and relaxed, perfectly present in the moment, yet somehow connected to the long line of warriors who had practiced these same movements for generations. The sound of wooden swords cutting through the air, the soft scrape of feet on gravel, and the occasional word of instruction from Ogawa-sensei created a symphony of discipline that seemed to bring the entire village into harmony. As the training session concluded, the participants bowed to each other and to their teacher with the deep respect that was fundamental to all interactions in the village. This was not mere ceremony, but a genuine expression of gratitude for the opportunity to learn, for the wisdom of those who taught, and for the continuation of traditions that connected them to something larger than their individual lives. The bow was held for exactly the right amount of time, neither rushed nor prolonged. And the quality of attention brought to this simple gesture reflected the same mindfulness that characterized every other aspect of their practice. Following the morning training, Kenji made his way to the small tea house that served as the village's informal meeting place. The building was unremarkable from the outside, its weathered wood and simple lines blending seamlessly with the natural surroundings. But inside, it represented the heart of the community's social life. The proprietor, an elderly woman named Sato-san, had been serving tea and light meals to the villagers for more than 20 years, and she knew not only everyone's preferences, but also their moods, concerns, and family situations. The interior of the tea house was arranged according to principles that prioritized both function and aesthetics. Low tables were positioned to take advantage of the natural light that filtered through paper windows, while alcoves contained seasonal flower arrangements and pieces of calligraphy that were changed regularly to reflect the passage of time. The wooden floors were worn smooth by decades of use, and every surface was maintained with the kind of meticulous care that characterized all aspects of village life. Kenji took his usual place near the window that looked out onto the main path through the village, where he could observe the daily patterns of life while enjoying his morning tea. The tea ceremony, even in its simplified, everyday form, was treated with the respect due to any practice that had been refined over centuries. The water was heated to exactly the right temperature. The leaves were measured with precision, and the steeping time was carefully monitored. The act of drinking tea became a meditation in itself, each sip taken with full attention to the flavor, temperature, and aroma. From his vantage point in the tea house, Kenji could observe the rich tapestry of village life as it unfolded throughout the morning hours. Children walked past on their way to the small school where they would learn not only reading and writing, but also the moral principles that would guide their adult lives. Their clothing was simple but clean, their behavior respectful but not fearful, reflecting the balanced approach to discipline that characterized the community's approach to child rearing. The children bowed politely to any adults they encountered, and the adults responded with the same courtesy, recognizing that respect was something that flowed in all directions, regardless of age or social position. Merchants occasionally passed through the village, their pack animals loaded with goods from distant towns and cities. These visitors were always treated with hospitality, offered tea and shelter, and invited to share news from the outside world. The villagers listened to these reports with interest, but without the anxiety or excitement that might characterize communities more connected to the rapid changes of urban life. The news was received, considered, and then allowed to settle into the larger context of village life without disrupting the fundamental rhythms that had sustained the community for generations. The morning hours also brought the various craftspeople of the village to their work. The potter, Kimura-san, could be seen through the open doors of his workshop, his hands covered in clay as he shaped vessels with the same attention to form and function that characterized all aspects of village craftsmanship. Each piece he created was intended not merely to be functional, but to embody aesthetic principles that would bring a moment of beauty into the daily lives of those who used them. The process was unhurried, with each stage of creation given the time and attention it required to achieve its full potential. Similarly, the carpenter who maintained the village's buildings approached his work with the understanding that he was not merely fixing broken things, but participating in the ongoing life of the community. When he repaired a sliding door or replaced a section of roofing, he did so with wood that had been carefully selected and prepared, using techniques that had been passed down through generations of craftsmen. The repairs were made not just to restore function, but to maintain the harmony and beauty of the built environment that surrounded the villagers' daily lives. As the morning progressed toward midday, the pace of village life shifted subtly. The intense focus of the training session gave way to a more relaxed rhythm as people moved between various activities and responsibilities. Kenji finished his tea and made his way to the small office where he performed his administrative duties as one of the village's junior officials. His responsibilities included maintaining records of rice production, monitoring the condition of the paths and bridges that connected Takimura to neighboring communities, and serving as a liaison with the domain officials who occasionally visited from the larger town several days' journey away. The office was located in a building that also served as the village meeting hall, its large main room capable of accommodating the entire adult population when important decisions needed to be made. The building's architecture reflected the same principles of simplicity and functionality that characterized all village construction, with clean lines, natural materials, and careful attention to the way light and air moved through the space. Kenji's work area consisted of a low desk, shelves for storing records, and the various tools needed for calligraphy and document preparation. His morning's work involved updating the records that tracked the village's agricultural production. This was not merely bookkeeping, but an activity that required deep knowledge of farming cycles, weather patterns, and the capabilities of individual families. Each entry in the records reflected not just numbers, but the stories of real people working to sustain themselves and their community through their connection to the land. Kenji took pride in the accuracy and completeness of these records, understanding that they served not only administrative purposes, but also provided a kind of historical documentation of the village's life over time. The work required considerable skill in calligraphy, and Kenji approached each document as an opportunity to practice this art form that was considered essential for any educated person. The formation of each character was given careful attention, with the brush held at precisely the right angle and moved with the controlled strength that produced clear, beautiful writing. The act of writing became a form of meditation, requiring the same kind of focused concentration that characterized martial arts practice. As he worked, Kenji could hear the sounds of village life continuing outside the office windows. Children playing games in the spaces between houses, their laughter mixing with the sounds of adults going about their various tasks. The steady rhythm of rice being pounded in mortars, the occasional call of someone greeting a neighbor, and the ever-present background of natural sounds, birds singing, water flowing, wind moving through bamboo, created an audio environment that was both stimulating and soothing. The approach of noon was signaled not by any mechanical clock, but by the gradually increasing intensity of cooking smells and the subtle shift in the village's activity patterns. Families began gathering for the midday meal, which was considered one of the important social events of each day. Unlike the quick, often solitary eating that characterized much of modern life, the midday meal in Takamura was a time for families to come together, share food that had been prepared with care and attention, and maintain the bonds that held the community together. Kenji completed his morning's administrative work and carefully stored his materials before making his way home for lunch. His wife, Yuki, would have spent the morning hours engaged in her own complex set of activities, tending the small garden behind their house, preparing food for the day's meals, and maintaining the impeccable cleanliness that was expected in every village home. Her work was considered just as important as his own, requiring skills that had been developed over years of practice and contributing to the overall harmony and well-being of their household and the larger community. The garden behind their house was a masterpiece of careful planning and patient cultivation. Every plant had been chosen not only for its practical value, but also for the way it contributed to the overall aesthetic composition of the space. Vegetables grew in neat rows alongside herbs that were used both for cooking and for traditional medicine. A small section was devoted to flowers that would be used in the house's seasonal arrangements, while a corner near the back wall contained a tiny pond where goldfish lived among water lilies and lotus plants. Yuki's approach to gardening reflected the same principles that governed all aspects of village life: respect for natural processes, attention to detail, and patience with the slow rhythms of growth and change. She knew which plants grew best in which seasons, how to prepare the soil to maximize both productivity and beauty, and how to maintain the delicate balance that allowed the garden ecosystem to thrive year after year. Her knowledge had been accumulated through years of observation and practice, supplemented by wisdom passed down from older women in the village who had been gardening for decades. The midday meal itself was a study in the transformation of simple ingredients into something approaching art. The rice had been grown in the village's own paddies, harvested, dried, and stored according to traditional methods that preserved both its nutritional value and its flavor. It was cooked in small batches, using water from the mountain stream, and served in ceramic bowls that had been made by the village potter. Each grain seemed to possess its own perfect texture and taste, the result of centuries of refinement in both cultivation and preparation techniques. Accompanying the rice were vegetables from the garden, prepared using techniques that had been developed to preserve their natural flavors while making them digestible and nutritious. Nothing was wasted. Vegetable scraps were composted to enrich the soil, and even the water used for cooking was saved to nourish plants. The meal also included small amounts of fish from the village's ponds and streams, caught using traditional methods that ensured the sustainability of these important food sources. The act of eating together was treated with the same mindfulness that characterized all other village activities. Conversation during meals was gentle and focused on topics that would contribute to family harmony rather than create stress or conflict. Children were taught to appreciate the food they were eating, understanding not only where it came from, but also the work and skill that had been required to produce it. Gratitude was expressed not through elaborate ceremonies, but through the quality of attention brought to the experience of sharing food together. After the meal, there was a brief period of rest that allowed for digestion and provided a natural break in the day's activities. This was not idle time, but rather a period of quiet reflection that helped maintain the mental and physical balance necessary for the afternoon's responsibilities. Kenji might spend these minutes practicing calligraphy, reading from one of the few books in his possession, or simply sitting quietly while observing the play of light and shadow in his home's interior spaces. The afternoon hours brought a different quality to village life, one that was perhaps less intense than the morning, but no less purposeful. Kenji returned to his administrative duties, but the afternoon's work often involved activities that took him throughout the village and sometimes into the surrounding countryside. He might need to inspect the condition of bridges or paths, meet with farmers to discuss irrigation issues, or travel to neighboring communities to maintain the relationships that were essential for the village's security and prosperity. These travels provided opportunities to observe the larger landscape of which Takamura was a part. The mountain valleys contained numerous small settlements, each with its own character and specializations, but all sharing similar values and approaches to daily life. The network of relationships between these communities was complex and important, involving not only economic exchanges, but also social connections that were maintained through visits, festivals, and marriages between families from different villages. The paths that connected these communities were themselves works of art, carefully maintained and designed to harmonize with the natural landscape. Stone steps were placed at exactly the right intervals for comfortable walking. Bridges were constructed to complement rather than dominate the streams they crossed, and rest areas were positioned to take advantage of particularly beautiful views or the shade of ancient trees. Walking these paths became a form of moving meditation, with each step taken in awareness of both the immediate surroundings and the destination ahead. During his afternoon travels, Kenji often encountered other travelers, merchants, messengers, pilgrims visiting local temples, or officials traveling between administrative centers. These meetings were always conducted according to strict protocols of courtesy and respect, but they also provided opportunities for the exchange of information and the maintenance of the broader social networks that connected rural communities to each other and to the larger world. The conversations that took place during these encounters were carefully structured to avoid topics that might create conflict or misunderstanding, while still allowing for the sharing of important information. News about weather conditions, crop prospects, or changes in government policies was exchanged freely, but always within a context that emphasized the importance of maintaining harmony and stability. Personal information was shared more cautiously and only after the appropriate social bonds had been established through the proper exchange of courtesies. When Kenji returned to the village in the late afternoon, he often found the community engaged in the collective activities that were essential for maintaining their shared infrastructure.
Groups of villagers might be working together to repair sections of the irrigation system that brought water to the rice paddies, or collaborating to maintain the paths and bridges within the village itself. These work parties were organized according to principles that ensured everyone contributed according to their abilities while no one was overburdened with responsibilities. The work itself was approached with the same attention to quality and aesthetics that characterized all village activities. A repair to a stone wall would be made not just to restore its function, but to maintain its beauty and its harmony with the surrounding landscape. New construction would be planned not only to meet immediate practical needs, but also to contribute to the overall visual coherence of the village environment. Every decision was made with consideration for how it would affect both present and future generations of villagers. These collective work sessions were also important social events that strengthened the bonds between community members. Working together on shared projects provided opportunities for the exchange of knowledge and skills, with older villagers teaching younger ones and specialists sharing their expertise with those who were learning new crafts. The work was punctuated by breaks for tea and conversation, and the overall atmosphere was one of cooperation rather than competition or pressure to achieve immediate results. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, the quality of light began to change, casting longer shadows and creating the golden illumination that seemed to transform even the most ordinary village scenes into something approaching poetry. This was the time when many villagers turned to personal projects and hobbies that expressed their individual interests and talents while still contributing to the overall beauty and functionality of the community. Kenji often used this time to practice his calligraphy, working on projects that would eventually be displayed in the village meeting hall or given as gifts to mark special occasions. The practice required not only technical skill, but also a deep understanding of the literary and philosophical traditions that gave meaning to the characters being written. Each piece of calligraphy was intended not merely to convey information, but to embody aesthetic and spiritual principles that would inspire those who viewed it. Others in the village pursued their own artistic and craft activities during these late afternoon hours. The village's weaver could often be seen at her loom, creating textiles that combined practical functionality with beautiful patterns and colors derived from local plants. Her work required not only technical expertise, but also a deep understanding of the aesthetic principles that governed traditional Japanese design. Each piece she created was unique, reflecting both her personal artistic vision and the larger cultural traditions that had shaped the craft over centuries. The potter continued his work during these hours as well, often focusing on the more experimental pieces that pushed the boundaries of traditional forms, while still respecting the fundamental principles that made his work both functional and beautiful. He might spend hours perfecting the curve of a tea bowl's rim or the balance of a vase's proportions, understanding that these seemingly minor details could transform a merely adequate piece into something that would bring joy and inspiration to those who used it. The carpenter often used the late afternoon light for the fine detail work that required the most careful attention to precision and craftsmanship.
This might involve carving decorative elements for a new building, or creating the precisely fitted joints that allowed traditional Japanese architecture to stand for centuries without the use of nails or other metal fasteners.
His work connected him to a tradition of craftsmanship that stretched back hundreds of years, and he took pride in maintaining standards of excellence that honored both his teachers and the generations of craftsmen who would follow him.
As evening approached, the pace of village life began to slow once again, but in a way that felt natural and comfortable rather than rushed or pressured. The transition from day to night was marked not by artificial lighting that eliminated the darkness, but by the gradual illumination of paper lanterns that created pools of warm, golden light while still preserving the natural rhythms of sunset and nightfall. The evening meal was prepared and consumed with the same attention to quality and mindfulness that characterized the midday meal, but with a slightly different character that reflected the day's accumulated experiences and the anticipation of rest and renewal.
The foods might be different, perhaps featuring ingredients that required longer cooking times or dishes that were particularly associated with evening consumption. But the underlying principles of gratitude, attention, and family harmony remained constant.
After the evening meal, families often spent time together, engaged in activities that strengthened their bonds and provided education for the children.
Stories were told that conveyed not only entertainment, but also moral instruction and cultural knowledge.
These were not elaborate performances, but intimate sharing sessions that allowed older family members to pass down wisdom and values to the younger generation.
The stories often featured heroes who exemplified the virtues that were most valued in village life: courage, honor, compassion, and dedication to the welfare of others. Children also received instruction in various practical skills during these evening hours.
They might learn to perform simple calligraphy, practice basic martial arts movements, or help with household tasks that would prepare them for adult responsibilities. The teaching was gentle and patient, recognizing that true learning required time and repetition rather than pressure or criticism.
Mistakes were treated as natural parts of the learning process, and children were encouraged to continue practicing until they achieved mastery. The adults often used the evening hours for their own continuing education and self-improvement. They might study classical texts that contained wisdom about philosophy, history, or practical skills relevant to their daily lives. Reading was considered not just a source of information, but a form of spiritual discipline that required concentration, reflection, and the integration of new knowledge with existing understanding.
Some evenings were devoted to community activities that brought the entire village together.
These might include festivals that celebrated seasonal changes, ceremonies that honored ancestors or local deities, or meetings where important community decisions were discussed and made. These gatherings reinforced the social bonds that held the village together, while also providing opportunities for the expression of creativity and the celebration of shared values. The village festivals were particularly important events that required weeks of preparation and involved virtually every member of the community in some capacity.
The festivals were timed to coincide with significant moments in the agricultural or religious calendar, and they served multiple functions: honoring spiritual traditions, celebrating the community's achievements,
providing entertainment and social interaction, and reinforcing the cultural values that guided village life.
Preparation for festivals involved the creation of decorations, the practice of traditional songs and dances, and the preparation of special foods that were associated with particular celebrations.
These activities provided opportunities for the sharing of skills and knowledge between generations, as older villagers taught younger ones the techniques and traditions that had been passed down through their families for centuries. The festivals themselves were characterized by a combination of solemnity and joy that reflected the community's understanding of the sacred dimensions of daily life. Religious ceremonies were conducted with deep reverence and attention to proper ritual forms, while social activities were marked by genuine warmth and celebration. The entire community participated according to their abilities and interests, with no one excluded from the shared experience of marking these important moments in the village's collective life. As the evening progressed toward night, the village gradually settled into the peaceful quiet that would prepare its inhabitants for sleep and renewal. The sounds of daily activity faded, replaced by the natural symphony of night sounds, insects chirping, water flowing, and the occasional call of night birds. Paper lanterns continued to glow in windows and along paths, providing just enough light for safe movement while preserving the restful darkness that was essential for proper sleep. The preparation for sleep was treated with the same mindfulness that characterized all other aspects of village life. Homes were cleaned and organized to ensure that the next day would begin with order and beauty. Clothing was folded and stored properly. Tools were cleaned and returned to their designated places, and any remaining tasks were completed or properly scheduled for the following day. Personal hygiene and grooming were attended to with care, not merely for cleanliness, but as expressions of self-respect and consideration for others. The act of washing and preparing for sleep became a ritual of transition that helped separate the activities of the day from the rest and restoration of night. This transition was considered important for both physical and mental health, allowing the mind and body to fully release the day's experiences and prepare for the renewal that would come with morning. The sleeping arrangements in village homes reflected the same principles of simplicity and functionality that governed all aspects of daily life. Futons were laid out on tatami mats in rooms that could serve multiple purposes during the day, maximizing the efficient use of limited space while providing comfortable and healthy sleeping conditions. The materials used, cotton, silk, and plant fibers, were chosen for their natural properties and their ability to maintain proper temperature and humidity levels throughout the night. Before sleep, many villagers spent a few minutes in quiet reflection or meditation, reviewing the day's experiences and setting intentions for the following day. This was not a formal religious practice, but rather a personal discipline that helped maintain mental clarity and emotional balance. The reflection might focus on moments of gratitude for the day's blessings, consideration of lessons learned from challenges encountered, or simple appreciation for the beauty and meaning found in ordinary activities. The quality of sleep in the village was generally excellent, supported by the physical activity of daily work, the absence of artificial stimulation, and the deep sense of security that came from living in a stable, supportive community. The natural rhythms of light and darkness were respected,
allowing the body's internal clock to maintain its proper function. The quiet environment, free from the noise and disturbance of modern life, provided the conditions necessary for truly restorative rest. Dreams, when they occurred, often reflected the peaceful, ordered nature of village life. They might feature scenes from the day's activities, encounters with ancestors or spiritual beings, or symbolic representations of the natural cycles that governed agricultural and community life. Dreams were considered important sources of insight and guidance, and particularly significant or unusual dreams were sometimes shared with family members or community elders who might help interpret their meaning. The night hours were also important for the village's security, though this was provided not through elaborate fortifications or armed guards, but through the mutual watchfulness and care of community members for each other. The close-knit nature of village life meant that unusual sounds or activities would quickly be noticed and investigated. The network of relationships and mutual obligations that connected all villagers provided a natural security system that was both effective and consistent with the community's values. Occasionally, the night quiet might be broken by legitimate activities: a messenger arriving with important news, a medical emergency requiring the attention of the village healer, or natural events like storms that required community response. These situations were handled with the same calm efficiency and cooperation that characterized all village activities, demonstrating the resilience and adaptability that allowed the community to thrive despite the challenges of rural life. The night also provided opportunities for activities that required darkness or quiet. The village astronomer might spend hours observing the stars and planets, maintaining the calendar, and providing guidance for agricultural timing. Night fishing in the village ponds and streams could be particularly productive during certain seasons, providing additional food sources while respecting the natural cycles of aquatic life. Some villagers used the quiet night hours for contemplative activities that required sustained concentration. Advanced practitioners of meditation might spend entire nights in seated meditation, exploring states of consciousness that were not accessible during the busy day hours. Scholars might use the peaceful night environment for intensive study of complex texts that demanded their complete attention. The progression of night toward morning was marked by subtle changes in temperature, humidity, and the behavior of nocturnal animals. Experienced villagers could tell time during the night hours simply by observing these natural indicators, demonstrating the deep connection between human life and natural cycles that characterized traditional Japanese culture. This sensitivity to natural rhythms was considered not only practical, but also spiritually significant, representing the harmony between human consciousness and the larger patterns of existence. As dawn approached, the village began its gentle transition back toward the activities of day. Early risers might already be moving about their morning preparations, but always with consideration for those who were still sleeping. The sounds of morning preparation were kept to a minimum, and any necessary activities were conducted with the quiet efficiency that demonstrated respect for the community's need for rest. The first light of dawn brought with it a sense of renewal and possibility that seemed to infuse the entire village with energy and purpose. The beauty of sunrise over the mountain landscape provided a daily reminder of the natural forces that sustained all life. while the familiar sounds and sights of the awakening community offered reassurance of continuity and stability. The daily cycle that we have followed through one complete rotation was repeated day after day, season after season, year after year, with variations that reflected the changing needs of agricultural work, the celebrations of festivals and ceremonies, and the natural evolution of individual lives within the stable framework of community traditions. Children grew into adults, learning the skills and values that would allow them to contribute to the village's prosperity and to pass these traditions on to their own children. The agricultural seasons provided the overarching rhythm that governed village life. With spring planting, summer cultivation, autumn harvest, and winter preparation, each requiring different activities and offering different opportunities for community cooperation and celebration. The rice paddies that surrounded the village were not merely sources of food, but integral parts of a complex ecosystem that supported numerous species of plants and animals while creating landscapes of extraordinary beauty. Spring in Takamura was a time of intense activity and optimism as the villagers prepared their fields for another growing season. The rice paddies had to be flooded and prepared, seeds had to be started and transplanted, and all the tools and equipment needed for the growing season had to be cleaned, repaired, and organized. This work required the cooperation of the entire community, as tasks like flooding the paddies and transplanting rice seedlings were most efficiently accomplished when many people worked together. The spring season also brought the cherry blossom festivals that were among the most important celebrations in the village calendar. The beauty of the blooming trees provided inspiration for poetry, art, and music, while the brief duration of the blossoms served as a reminder of the impermanence that gave special meaning to each moment of existence. The festivals included traditional ceremonies that honored the spirits of nature, as well as social activities that strengthened bonds between community members. Summer brought its own rhythm of work and celebration, with long days devoted to the careful tending of crops and the maintenance of the irrigation systems that were essential for successful agriculture. The hot, humid weather required adjustments in daily schedules, with the most strenuous work often conducted during the cooler morning and evening hours. Summer festivals celebrated the abundance of the growing season while also seeking divine protection from the natural disasters that could threaten the crops. The summer months were also important for the collection and preservation of wild foods that supplemented the village's agricultural production. Mushrooms, berries, medicinal plants, and other forest products were gathered according to traditional knowledge about their locations, seasons, and proper harvesting techniques. This activity required extensive knowledge of the local ecosystem and careful attention to sustainability practices that ensured these resources would remain available for future generations. Autumn was the most critical season for the village's economic survival, as the rice harvest determined whether the community would have adequate food supplies for the coming year. The harvest required the participation of virtually every able-bodied person in the village, working together in coordinated teams that could efficiently gather, process, and store the grain. The quality of the harvest was determined not only by weather and growing conditions, but also by the skill and dedication of the farmers who had tended the crops throughout the growing season.
The autumn harvest season was also a time of intense community celebration, as successful completion of the harvest ensured the village's survival for another year. Harvest festivals included ceremonies of thanksgiving for the earth's abundance, as well as social activities that allowed the community to celebrate their shared accomplishment. These celebrations often continued for several days, with different activities for various age groups and interests within the community. Winter brought a different pace to village life, with outdoor agricultural work largely suspended, but many indoor activities intensified. This was the season for repairing and maintaining tools and equipment, for practicing crafts that required sustained attention, and for the social and educational activities that strengthened community bonds. The shorter days and longer nights provided time for reflection and planning that helped prepare for the coming agricultural season. Winter was also the season when many of the village's cultural traditions were most intensively practiced and transmitted. Children had more time available for education. Adults could pursue artistic and intellectual interests that were difficult to maintain during the busy agricultural seasons, and the entire community could focus on the ceremonies and celebrations that reinforced their shared values and beliefs. The harsh weather of winter required careful preparation and community cooperation to ensure everyone's safety and comfort.
Firewood had to be gathered and stored, food supplies had to be preserved and rationed, and homes had to be winterized with additional insulation and weather protection.
The village's survival during the winter months depended on the quality of preparation that had been conducted during the warmer seasons, demonstrating the importance of long-term planning and community coordination. The winter months also provided opportunities for activities that were impossible during other seasons. The snow-covered landscape offered its own form of beauty that inspired artistic expression and contemplation.
Ice fishing became possible in the village's ponds and streams, providing fresh protein during a season when other food sources were limited.
The quiet of winter nights was particularly conducive to meditation and study, allowing for spiritual practices that required extended periods of uninterrupted concentration. Over the years, the village developed traditions and customs that helped maintain morale and community spirit during the challenging winter months. Storytelling sessions became more elaborate, with skilled narrators sharing epic tales that could occupy entire evenings. Indoor games and competitions provided entertainment while also developing skills that were useful in other contexts. Craft projects undertaken during the winter months often produced items that would be used throughout the following year, making the enforced indoor time productive as well as enjoyable. The cycle of seasons provided a natural framework for understanding the larger patterns of existence, with each season offering its own lessons about the relationship between human effort and natural forces. The villagers developed a deep appreciation for the way their lives were embedded within these larger cycles, finding meaning and purpose in their roles as participants in the ongoing dance between human culture and the natural world. Individual lives within the village followed their own cycles that paralleled and intersected with the seasonal rhythms. Children were born, grew to maturity, married, raised their own children, and eventually passed away,
but always within the context of community traditions that gave meaning and continuity to these universal human experiences. The village's social institutions provided support and guidance for individuals during all phases of their lives, ensuring that no one faced life's challenges alone. Marriage in Takamura was not merely a private arrangement between two individuals, but a community event that strengthened the social bonds that held the village together. Marriages were often arranged through the careful consideration of family backgrounds, personal compatibility, and the community's needs for maintaining its demographic balance and economic stability. The process of courtship and engagement involved the entire extended families of the prospective bride and groom, with community elders providing guidance and wisdom based on generations of experience. Wedding ceremonies were elaborate community celebrations that could last for several days, involving not only the immediate families, but virtually everyone in the village. The ceremonies combined ancient Shinto and Buddhist traditions with local customs that had evolved over centuries of village life. The bride and groom were not merely joining their individual lives, but becoming part of the larger community fabric that would support and sustain their family throughout their lives together. The birth of children was similarly treated as a community event, with experienced women providing support and guidance to new mothers, while the entire village celebrated the arrival of new members. Children were considered not just the responsibility of their immediate parents, but of the entire community, with various adults playing roles in their education and development. This shared approach to child-rearing ensured that children grew up with a strong sense of belonging and security, while also learning the skills and values they would need as adult community members. Education in the village was a lifelong process that began in early childhood and continued throughout an individual's life. Children learned basic literacy and numeracy, but they also absorbed the moral values, cultural traditions, and practical skills that would allow them to contribute meaningfully to community life. The education was provided not through formal schools, but through the integration of learning into daily activities, with children observing and gradually participating in all aspects of adult life. Young people reaching maturity underwent formal ceremonies that marked their transition from childhood to adult status. These coming-of-age ceremonies were important community events that recognized the young person's readiness to assume adult responsibilities, while also celebrating the community's success in nurturing another generation of capable, virtuous citizens. The ceremonies often included tests of skill and knowledge that demonstrated the young person's preparation for adult life. Adult life in the village was characterized by the gradual assumption of increasing responsibilities and the development of expertise in particular areas of knowledge or skill. Individuals were expected to contribute their talents and efforts to community welfare while also pursuing their own development and fulfillment. The balance between individual achievement and community responsibility was maintained through social institutions that recognized and rewarded both personal excellence and contributions to the common good. The village's approach to aging and death reflected the same principles of respect and community support that governed all other aspects of life. Elderly villagers were honored for their wisdom and experience, and their continued contributions to community life were valued even as their physical capabilities declined. The transition from active participation to elder status was gradual and dignified, with older villagers assuming advisory roles that allowed them to share their knowledge with younger generations. Death, when it came, was treated not as a defeat or failure, but as a natural part of the larger cycles that governed all existence. Funeral ceremonies honored the deceased person's contributions to community life while also celebrating their transition to ancestor status. The community's mourning was genuine, but not overwhelming, balanced by an understanding that death was part of the natural order that made life itself meaningful and precious. The village maintained careful records and memories of its deceased members, ensuring that their contributions would not be forgotten and that their wisdom would continue to guide future generations. Ancestor veneration was not merely a religious practice, but a practical way of maintaining continuity between past, present, and future. The ancestors were considered to remain involved in village life, providing guidance and protection for their living descendants. Throughout all these individual life cycles, the daily rhythms we have described continued to provide structure and meaning to existence. The morning training sessions, the midday meals, the afternoon work, and the evening family time created a framework within which individual lives could unfold while remaining connected to the larger community. The repetitive nature of these daily activities was not experienced as tedious routine, but as meaningful participation in the ongoing life of the village. The village's relationship with the outside world was carefully managed to maintain its internal harmony, while still participating in the larger economic and social networks that were necessary for survival. Trade relationships with other communities provided access to goods and materials that could not be produced locally, while cultural exchanges ensured that the village remained connected to broader Japanese civilization without losing its distinctive character. Occasionally, young people from the village would travel to cities or other regions to pursue education or economic opportunities that were not available locally. These departures were treated as natural parts of individual development, but the village maintained connections with its former members, and many eventually returned to contribute their acquired knowledge and skills to community life. The circulation of people and ideas between the village and the outside world helped prevent isolation while preserving the core values and traditions that defined community identity. The village also served as a refuge for people from other regions who sought the stability and peace that characterized life in Takamura. These newcomers were carefully evaluated and gradually integrated into community life if they demonstrated genuine commitment to the village's values and willingness to contribute to its welfare. The process of integration could take years, but successful newcomers eventually became full community members with all the rights and responsibilities that status entailed. The physical environment of the village continued to evolve over time, with new buildings constructed, old ones repaired or replaced, and infrastructure improved to meet changing needs. However, all changes were made according to principles that preserved the essential character of the place while adapting to new circumstances. The village's appearance might change gradually over decades, but its fundamental harmony with the natural landscape and its expression of traditional Japanese aesthetic values remained constant. The agricultural lands surrounding the village were similarly maintained and improved over time, with successive generations of farmers adding their knowledge and efforts to the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Soil fertility was preserved and enhanced through careful crop rotation, composting, and other sustainable practices that ensured the land would remain productive for future generations. The rice paddies, vegetable gardens, and forest areas were not merely exploited for short-term gain, but cultivated as integral parts of a larger ecosystem that supported both human and non-human life. The village's water management system was particularly sophisticated, with an intricate network of channels, reservoirs, and distribution systems that had been developed over centuries of experience with local conditions. The system not only provided irrigation for crops, but also supplied drinking water, supported aquaculture, and provided the flowing water features that contributed to the village's aesthetic beauty. Maintaining and improving this system required detailed knowledge of hydrology, engineering, and ecology that was passed down through generations of water masters. The forest areas around the village were managed according to principles that balanced human needs with ecological sustainability. Trees were harvested selectively to provide construction materials and fuel without destroying the forest ecosystem. Wild plants and animals were protected, and their populations maintained at levels that ensured their continued availability while preventing overpopulation that might damage their habitats. The forests also provided spiritual and aesthetic benefits, serving as places for meditation, artistic inspiration, and communion with nature. The village's craftspeople continued to refine and develop their skills over generations, with each artisan building upon the knowledge and techniques inherited from their predecessors, while also contributing their own innovations and improvements. The pottery, textiles, metalwork, and woodworking produced in the village were not merely functional items, but expressions of aesthetic values and spiritual principles that enhanced daily life, while also serving as forms of artistic expression. The martial arts traditions practiced in the village were similarly maintained and developed over time, with each generation of warriors adding their insights and experiences to the accumulated knowledge of centuries. The training methods were constantly refined to maximize their effectiveness while preserving their spiritual and character-building dimensions. The martial arts served not only as preparation for potential military service, but also as forms of physical and mental discipline that enhanced all aspects of life. The village's intellectual and cultural life was enriched by the gradual accumulation of books, artworks, and other cultural materials that were acquired through trade, gift exchange, and the creative efforts of community members. A small but carefully maintained library contained works on philosophy, history, literature, and practical subjects that served as resources for continuing education and spiritual development. These materials were treated with great reverence and carefully preserved for future generations. The religious and spiritual life of the village centered around a small shrine that served both Shinto and Buddhist practices, reflecting the syncretic nature of traditional Japanese spirituality. The shrine was maintained by the community as a whole, with various individuals taking responsibility for different aspects of its upkeep and the ceremonies that were conducted there. The spiritual practices were not separate from daily life, but integrated into all activities, providing meaning and context for even the most mundane tasks. The festivals and ceremonies that marked important points in the yearly cycle continued to evolve gradually over time, with new elements added and old ones modified to meet changing circumstances, while preserving their essential spiritual and social functions.
These celebrations served multiple purposes: honoring spiritual traditions, strengthening community bonds, providing entertainment and joy, and marking the passage of time in ways that connected human life to larger cosmic rhythms. The village's governance system was based on consensus and mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority, with decisions made through careful consultation among all affected parties. Leadership roles were assigned based on expertise, experience, and community trust rather than inherited status or economic power. The system was designed to ensure that all voices were heard and that decisions reflected the genuine needs and values of the entire community. Conflict resolution within the village was handled through mediation and compromise rather than punishment or coercion. When disputes arose, community elders worked with the involved parties to find solutions that addressed underlying problems while preserving relationships and community harmony. The emphasis was always on healing and restoration rather than blame or retribution, reflecting the understanding that the community's well-being depended on maintaining good relationships among all its members. The village's economic system was based on principles of mutual aid and reciprocity rather than market competition. While individual households maintained their own property and resources, there was extensive sharing and cooperation that ensured no one lacked basic necessities while also making efficient use of community resources. Surplus production was shared according to need and contribution, with the understanding that everyone's welfare was interconnected. The currency used within the village was primarily rice, which served not only as a medium of exchange, but also as a store of value and a measure of wealth. However, much of the economic activity took place through barter and gift exchange that strengthened social relationships while also meeting material needs. The economic system was embedded within the larger social and spiritual framework of village life, rather than operating as a separate sphere with its own logic and values. As we reach the end of our journey through the daily life of this remarkable community, we can see how every aspect of existence in Takamura was infused with purpose, beauty, and meaning. The villagers had created a way of life that honored both individual dignity and community welfare, that respected both human needs and natural processes, and that found the sacred within the ordinary activities of daily existence. Their example offers us a vision of what human life can become when it is organized according to principles of harmony, wisdom, and mutual care. The rhythms of daily life that we have followed through their complete cycle continued year after year, generation after generation, creating a continuity of experience that connected each individual to the larger stream of human existence, while also providing the stability and security necessary for human flourishing. The village represented not just a way of organizing economic and social life, but a complete vision of what it means to live as human beings in harmony with each other and with the natural world that sustains all life. In our modern world, we may not be able to recreate the exact conditions that made life in Takamura possible, but we can learn from the principles and values that guided the villagers' daily choices.
Their commitment to mindfulness, their respect for tradition combined with openness to beneficial change, their balance of individual development with community responsibility, and their integration of spiritual values with practical activities all offer guidance for creating more meaningful and sustainable ways of life in our contemporary context. The story of daily life in Takamura reminds us that true wealth lies not in the accumulation of material possessions, but in the quality of our relationships with each other and with the natural world that surrounds us. It shows us that meaning and purpose can be found in the simplest activities when they are performed with attention, skill, and care. It demonstrates that individual fulfillment and community welfare are not competing goals, but complementary aspects of a well-lived life. As we conclude our exploration of this remarkable community, we carry with us the image of people who had learned to find joy and meaning in the daily rhythms of ordinary life, who had created beauty in the midst of simplicity, and who had discovered that the path to happiness lies not in the endless pursuit of novelty and stimulation, but in the patient cultivation of wisdom, skill, and compassion. Their legacy continues to inspire us as we seek to create our own versions of the good life. And their example reminds us that such a life is always possible for those who are willing to pursue it with dedication and care. In the gentle rhythms of their days, in the careful attention they brought to every task, and in the love and respect they showed for each other and for the world around them, we find a timeless wisdom that can guide us toward our own versions of peace, purpose, and fulfillment. Good night.